Ooh, yeah. Woo. Nice. Woo.
Good morning again, Timothy. This time we are live, and it's a pleasure to have you with us again. Thank you for joining, and to everybody who is listening to us in Clubhouse or watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube or Facebook. Thank you for joining on Sunday morning. This is the 137th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Langley Squire CEO Timothy Langley. And well, as always, we're going to talk about the latest happenings in Japanese politics and in Japan. Of course, the news, economy, trade, defense, and so on. Before we start, actually, Timothy, thank you for actually bringing up the question. And I'm going to do this now. So, right. Okay. So, you may have seen several posts on LinkedIn about a tour of the National Diet of Japan. The tour took place last week on Thursday, and the guide of the tour was Timothy Langley himself, the person you're seeing now on your screens. So it was a tour which was held by the German Chamber of Commerce in Japan. And we had, about 44 people joining
That's right.
there. Yes. The tour was actually quite busy and successful at the same time. So, Timothy, would you mind telling us a little bit about it?
So actually, this was a repeat from an initiative that you started, Maya. You hosted a tour of the diet. You asked me to arrange that for your group. We did this about 2 months ago. It was in the spring, and there was about 45 people, a similar number, that signed up for Japan Expert Insights tour of the diet. And we did that, and then we had a networking event in Hibiya-Koen. We walked kind of through the rain to Hibiya-Koen, and that went so well that one of the members in the German chamber asked if we could do the same thing for their members, and we did that on Thursday, as you said. Entering into the National Parliament building is not easy. It's not for everybody, and getting a tour, a walking tour, and finding out how actually the building was made and what its role is in Japanese politics and how policy is chewed on in that process, it's very rare. So I was really happy and honored to do that. It looks like there's just really, I mean, this show is also a reflection on that, a growing interest in what's going on in Japanese politics. The rotating members of the prime minister and his cabinet always generates interest, but there is a bit more stability, and also Japan being the third largest economy in the world, really it's beginning to take traction. So I'm glad we're at the forefront of that. So thank you very much for initiating that, Maya.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Actually, it's not just my own idea. There were, the different events that led to it, and great that it is getting traction. And then there is one more thing that I know is going to happen next week next month in October. That's your presentation at Odawara Sensei's Benkyokai, isn't it?
That's right. So for many people who are watching this show, you know that I attend many Benkyokai, maybe 4 or 5, sometimes 6 a week. And a Benkyokai is, in English, it's translated into a study session, but it's basically an event where a member of the parliament has a group that is surrounding him, usually supporters or almost always supporters, and he gives a briefing. And for those who are in the game pretty seriously, they might hold a briefing once a month. More regularly, it's maybe once a quarter or so. But one of the members of the parliament that I join on their Benkyokai is Odawara Kiyoshi. And I've been very friendly and familiar with him for several years, and I invariably join his Benkyokai. It's a monthly Benkyokai, he is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. Actually, I think in the cabinet reshuffle, he gave up that position, but just immediately previously he was the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs. And he asked me to speak at his Benkyokai. So typically what happens in his particular Benkyokai is it's an early morning breakfast. He speaks for maybe a half an hour about what's going on that's of interest to the audience, what's going on in politics. And then he might invite a speaker or just have a Q&A. And in his next briefing, he's asked me to come up and talk about the Japanese economy, trade, investment, and that sort of thing. And so if there are people in the audience that would like to have never been to a Benkyokai, this is an easy one for you to get into. You need to register. You can't just walk in, so you need an invitation. So please contact me or Maya and we'll arrange for it. And I forget the date of that, but I think it's the second week in October on a Tuesday.
Yes, it is. Yes. And I believe that Langley Esquire is going to run several posts about this on its social media channels. So if you haven't followed the company yet, please do. Do that on LinkedIn, Facebook, also Twitter, and you can get more information about upcoming events there as well. So, Timothy, Japanese politics is, well, something that never ends, never stops. And we have gathered here actually to talk about this today. Without any further ado, let's dive into the latest events of, in this field.
Thank you, Maya. And let's get right into it. So if you're watching Japanese politics, there's a lot going on. There's almost always a lot going on. This week is a little bit different since the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, was in New York the entire week. He spoke at the UN General Assembly. There was a lot going on there. All of the leaders were in New York. He will be coming. He's already come back. And this next week is going to be particularly busy for him. But there was a lot going on last week. As a consequence of the reshuffling of the Japanese cabinet. That happens very infrequently, and the purpose of this particular reshuffle by the Prime Minister was to boost his really dismal numbers. His appreciation rate was in the low 30s and the very high 20s, and rather than trying to shoot for a general election, which he has some ability to call, a snap election. He's been toying with that for several months, and he didn't have the confidence that he would end up, or the LDP would end up with more diet seats after such a general election than beforehand. So the only other trick in his bag of tricks, other than giving away more money and releasing more surplus funds to prop up the economy, is a cabinet reshuffle. And he did that, and it was pretty massive. We've had a couple of discussions on that in this program. Of the 21 members of his cabinet, 11 were new members. So there is a train line of members in the lower house and in the upper house that have been reelected 4 or 5 times. In the upper house, they need to be reelected a smaller number of times because their term of office is 6 years rather than 4 years for the lower house. But 11 people being shifted out and new ones coming in, it's a bold gambit. And it's a bold gambit, particularly in Japan, because as much due diligence as you can run on these people who are almost always career diplomats. So if they've been in politics for 20 years, they've survived 4 or 5 elections. It's about 15 or 20 years. You should know them pretty well. But when you have a new group in, it generates far more scrutiny by the press, and we sure got that this last week. So it does heighten the risk for a prime minister that some of his ministers could be called to the mat, criticized, certain things in their past brought up, and they resign to protect the prime minister, or just because it doesn't look very good for them. This happened the first time when the prime minister became prime minister. He had a cabinet where 4 ministers were lost within the first 45 days. And as we've emphasized here before, that's never happened to a Japanese prime minister where he has survived beyond 6 months after that. Fumio Kishida did. He's still prime minister. It's been 2 years. And it looks like he's relatively stable, going strong, one could say, although the appreciation numbers don't reflect that. But with this new cabinet, he's got some issues that probably are going to be nipping him in the heels. So his current appreciation numbers, they did a poll right after the launch of the new cabinet. Depending on the right-leaning or the left-leaning people who are running those polls, usually it's newspapers, it's between the high 20s and still the low 30s. Not a whole lot of boost that the prime minister had hoped he would get out of a reshuffling of the cabinet. Same thing happened with G7 in Hiroshima. He had expected a huge boost in his approval rating. It jumped up about 7 percentage points. He was in the high 30s, but then it trickled back down. So he's got a little bit of an issue to deal with there. He's back from New York now. And I think if we characterize the prime minister's tenure as the leader of the LDP and as the leader of the cabinet, he speaks very eloquently and broadly on economic and security issues, but when it comes time to actually put the feet on the pavement, he's a little bit lacking on that. So we talk about some of the job creation and the value of the yen continuing to decline. The consumer price index also suffering consistently 24 months in a row right now. He does have issues with, it's the promotion of his issues compared to the actual performance. And in order to get the performance, that requires your cabinet to be working very diligently together. So some of the main issues, once again, I don't mean to harp on it because I hope people in the audience are consistent members of this briefing. So you know that the foreign minister was switched out. His number 2 man in his faction, in the Kishida faction, the 4th largest faction actually within the LDP, his number 2 gave up his post as a foreign minister, and it went to Miss Kamikawa, who is also in the Kishida faction, and Mr. Hayashi, who was a very successful, well-liked, internationally renowned foreign minister. Japan was the chair of G7, so his prominence was very high. He is basically focusing his efforts now on his election district, where he wants to retain his seat, but also the seat has grown since, because of the gerrymandering, his election district was merged with the slain foreign minister Abe's election district. So it's a big deal for him to win that seat, and I think he just took off. It's somewhat unusual in that he was the foreign minister. He was doing a good job. Japan is the chair of the G7, and in the middle, he steps out. So Ms. Kamikawa had a bit of a hard time in the UN because there's a lot of meetings that are going on there at the diplomatic level. But once again, the prime minister's tenure as prime minister can be characterized mostly as him visiting foreign countries. In this year, in 2023, he has visited more than 20 countries. So on the diplomatic end, it somewhat stands to reason. He was the longest serving foreign minister in Japanese post-war history. His strength is in foreign policy, in diplomacy, and he's really ratcheting that up in the UN. He made a speech on Tuesday about trying to revitalize the Security Council. So Japan is a invited member for the last 12 years of the Security Council. And Russia is one of the 5 countries that has a veto power. And as a consequence of that, the UN is really being criticized for not taking a more aggressive action on what's going on with Ukraine. So there's a lot of consternation there internationally. And the prime minister is attempting to put himself in the center of that so that he can be viewed as a a progressive leader globally, to establish rule-making authority, to coalesce, different energies from, conflicting countries and policies. He's trying to assert that, but at the same time, the Japanese economy is suffering. So he's got to focus on that. So as Maya said, this is our 137th consecutive briefing. It's significant. I mean, not only is the number 137, we're approaching 3 years, Maya, but kind of as significant as this briefing goes on every week. We haven't missed a week. And the reason is because not only, Maya is just very scary. And if you don't show up and brush your teeth, you catch it. But also, the audience is really growing, and the pace of reporting on what's going on in Japan is more understood and better appreciated. So I appreciate that everybody has tuned in there. So please continue to hit like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. But also, the design of this program is I try and give you a 30-minute encapsulated summary of what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you, that's timely, that's contemporary. And then we roll into a question and answer period. That's why it's called Japanese Politics One-on-One. Me together with you. So please join that and have your friends and colleagues listen in. So, as I said, the Prime Minister returned from New York. This next week is going to be geared toward, he's going to make a major economic statement, probably on Tuesday or Wednesday, and that will set the tone for what he is going to be doing throughout the rest of the year. He has not announced that there will be a supplemental budget, but we guess that there will be. That's what he's going to talk about this week, but also an extraordinary diet session, which also hasn't been announced. So the diet has recessed. It's already fulfilled its constitutional obligations, but the Prime Minister can, or a large enough number of the members of the diet can launch an extraordinary diet session, and we anticipate that happening. It will probably be announced. The other thing too is that it's at the end of September. By this next weekend, it will be October, and boy, that went by fast. So October is going to be politically very busy. I imagine there will be an extra diet session that is launched in October or November. It will wrap up before Christmas, and there will be a lot of decisions that are made there. The other complicating thing with that is with the new cabinet, and the knives are already out on the cabinet members. Miss Obuchi, who is of the cabinet and the LDP leadership, there are 4 critical members in the LDP that are shuffled, or sometimes shuffled, but it comes up for a shuffle whenever the Prime Minister shuffles the cabinet. So 11 changes here, 2 changes here, and one of those changes was bringing Miss Obuchi into the LDP leadership as election strategy chairperson. This is a big deal for her. Her father, as you might know, was Prime Minister. He died in office, and immediately after he died, Mr. Mori became Prime Minister. And many people remember Mr. Mori as the leader of the Abe faction. Before Mr. Abe became the leader, he was Prime Minister as a consequence of that. And then as he moved on, he turned in his badge, and he was the chairman of the Olympic Committee for a period of time. You might remember that there was a bit of a kerfuffle there, and he resigned from that. But he's still very influential. He is trying to be that unspoken leader within the Abe faction to pull them together to figure out who a leader is going to be. Through his help and tutelage, they haven't come up with a leader, but they've come up with a steering committee and this mix of designing what the management is going to be like, a team of 15 people, a smaller team of maybe 5 or 6, and a spokesman for the group, not a leader, not a chairperson. So he's still very influential in Japanese politics, and I think he was very influential in getting Miss Obuchi from just being a regular diet member. She was she hadn't been she was a minister of state in 2014. She was the Minister of International Trade and Industry. She was implicated in a scandal using political funds for other purposes. Two of her diet secretaries were arrested, interrogated, and they took the hit for that. And so she's been kind of quiet over the last 14 years. And this is her first emergence out, and the knives are already out for her. It's kind of unfortunate because in this particular cabinet, there are 4 members of the cabinet, and then Miss Obuchi, who is in the LDP. That's 6. That's a large number. I don't think there's been a larger number since maybe Shinzo Abe's first cabinet, in which she served as Minister of International Trade. But it is significant for women in Japan, and for this drive to bring Japan. The Council on Economic Development already identified Japan as 136 in terms of gender parity in politics among 141 countries. So they really need to do a better job, and to have somebody like Miss Obuchi come in. She's the youngest member of the cabinet, 49 years old, to be hammered again. This is Bunshun. Everybody, I think, knows Bunshun, since Japanese, not just Japanese politics, but I think Japanese society is very genteel, and the press doesn't really hammer hard on controversial subjects. They report on it, but they don't really hammer hard. And as a consequence, this magazine, Bunshun, has become very popular. It is a weekly magazine. It comes out on Thursdays. Everybody who is interested in Japanese politics, society, and economy reads this. It's something of a scandal rag. I think that's a little bit too harsh a characterization of it, but it does fill a void that is left by the general press, NHK in particular, to talk about what actually is going on, what's the true story. And few politicians can suffer very long with the scrutiny that is imposed by being investigated by Bunshun. So this is the lead article on Miss Obuchi this last week, and it is scathing. She's been in office for a week, and they're already talking about her handling of money and the funds, and she apologized when she first became identified as in the LDP leadership. She had a very tearful press report or a news conference, and then this came up. It is curious if the prime minister knew about this or not. I imagine lots of due diligence was done in identifying who the new members of the cabinet are going to be. But this is, it's unfortunate because she's a woman of the 5 new women in the cabinet. This is a distraction. But unfortunately, it could snowball. It could actually build into something bigger. It happened in the cabinet, in the prime minister's first cabinet, and in 43 days, he lost 4 of them. So we don't know if that's going to happen now, but we've got until the end of the year for a lot of things to happen, and for the prime minister to actually pull his team together and hopefully, get the economy going. So other than that, there are lots of other things to talk about. Let me see. There is a by-election that's coming up on October 22nd, so in about 3 weeks. This is to fill 2 positions, one in the upper house and one in the lower house. One was vacated because the member died, the member of the lower house in Nagasaki election district number 4. He died recently, and so there's a by-election to fill that seat. And also there was a resignation of an upper house member because he got into an altercation with his former secretary. Some physical violence was revealed, and he had to resign as a consequence of that. And they're both LDP members. So there's a by-election on the 22nd to fill those seats. And many pundits are saying if the LDP doesn't do well, if it doesn't win both of these seats, if the LDP doesn't succeed to those seats, then the prime minister is really going to be in a deep pot of stew. Alternatively, the predictions are if he does well, if both candidates for the LDP win those elections, then there might be a snap election before the end of the year. I don't see that happening. Even the fact that two LDP positions are replaced by two LDP candidates. And also, by the way, Ms. Obuchi is in charge of this election campaign strategy. So if it works, maybe her star shines. If it doesn't work, then the knives will be out. And once again, politics being as it is, Miss Obuchi is in the Motegi faction. Motegi's faction is the number 3 largest faction. It's larger than Mr. Kishida's faction. And Mr. Motegi is definitely going to be a candidate for prime minister. And that's why, one of the reasons why the prime minister kept him in the position of secretary general. Many people in this hierarchy of politics put the secretary general as the next most powerful person then next to the prime minister. You can have a debate on that, but certainly the prime minister is the president of the LDP. The secretary general runs the LDP while the president is being prime minister. So Miss Obuchi is in the Motegi faction, and they really don't like each other. And they haven't liked each other, even though he is the leader of that faction. So if he wants to become prime minister, and he's got Miss Obuchi working in the LDP, so he is the secretary general of the LDP, she is election strategy in the LDP. They see each other a lot. They deal with each other a lot. And he sees her as a potential threat. And there are many people that would like to see her run as prime minister. I think she will probably make a run for prime minister in the near future, depending on how the press treats her in this very delicate first term as election strategy chair within the LDP. But anyway, this election, this by-election that's going to happen on the 22nd of this next month is going to be carefully watched. I'll report on it a little bit more. The Ishin is going to run a candidate. The Constitutional Democratic Party is going to run a candidate. And so it will be a fight that is really going to reveal a lot about strategies, personalities, and leadership. And in a kind of a different realm, one of the people that the prime minister selected as when there's a shuffling of the cabinet, there's the cabinet that is shuffled, there's the LDP, and then there's also a change in the lower positions, for example, state minister or vice minister, and also other advisors. And the prime minister went out of his way and he identified, interestingly, a former leader of the Democratic People's Party. We reported on the Democratic People's Party. It is one of the opposition parties. They had an election of who their leader is going to be 2 weeks ago. And the individual who was then the leader succeeded himself. And his policy position to the members of his political party were, we need to align more with the LDP. We've gotten good traction out of being aligned with them on certain issues. And I think we should enhance that, because rather than trying to topple the LDP, we're not going to do that. We are very small. We've got almost a little bit more than 30 members inside the parliament. The better way is to somehow work in tandem with the LDP. And the person that he lost to, Maihara, was of the opposite position. He says, we need to align our forces with other opposition parties. We need to form a coalition. And as a group, we need to challenge the LDP leadership, make them look bad, challenge them in various elections like this by-election that's going to happen. So within the Democratic People's Party, the die was cast to form a better alliance with the LDP. And one of the reasons that we expected that the cabinet reshuffle would occur later in the month, like this week rather than 2 weeks ago, was because of the machinations within the LDP to bring the Democratic People's Party closer in, even maybe as a coalition partner. So the interesting move that the prime minister made this last week was he appointed as a senior advisor to him personally a former lawmaker who served as the vice president of the Democratic People's Party. Her name is Yata Wakako. And so it's not quite bringing in the Democratic People's Party. I think it's like a test or a trial balloon to see if this is going to make any difference. So it's receiving a lot of press. There are suggestions that the Democratic People's Party and the LDP are moving in that direction. It is highly likely that should things get a little bit tougher in an election, that yes, the Democratic People's Party could be like Komeito, an alliance partner within the LDP, within the leadership of the country. So we're carefully watching that, and in light of that, there's this rift that's growing between the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is the largest opposition party, and the Democratic People's Party. And they're fighting because initially they came out of the same political faction that took power from the LDP 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And it was split up, and that group split up into the Constitutional Democratic Party and the Democratic Party for the People. And the things that tie them together are they're opposed to the LDP, obviously. They're opposed to restarting the nuclear generators, to releasing the Fukushima water, and that sort of thing. But there are some issues that they are combined on as well. And there was an initiative to merge the two of these parties, which is to the Maihata strategy, form a coalition with our like-minded opposition parties to topple the LDP. And now the rift is beginning to grow, and it looks like those two parties are becoming a little bit more distant, which is also encouraging the thought that maybe the Democratic People's Party will join in a coalition government with the LDP. So let me see. One of the reasons why the Constitutional Democratic Party and the Democratic People's Party did not merge 3 years ago was the inclusion of a zero nuclear power plant policy in the Constitutional Democratic People's Party. So the largest opposition party wanted to have a zero nuclear plant strategy, and the DPP opposed that. They wanted to begin the reinitiation of the nuclear power plants. Also, the current leader and the former leader who succeeded himself, Mr. Tamaki, criticized the Constitutional Democratic Party for opposing the decarbonization bill that would allow existing nuclear power plants to operate effectively for more than 60 years. So this was pretty actively reported about a month ago, that nuclear reactors now can act well beyond their original due date for deconstruction, to now go to 60 years with certain revisions and improvements in their composition. And the real crux here is that both of these opposition parties are supported by Rengo, which is the largest trade union in Japan. And when these two parties are fighting with each other, their number one supporter, Rengo, is beginning to scratch its head, saying, "We can't split our votes. You guys need to be consistent in your policies that support our members, the workers of Japan." So it's a bit of a dicey trick. If the Democratic People's Party does come into a coalition, then that means that they will lose the Rengo support, the Rengo money, and all of that will go to the Constitutional Democratic Party, which wants to overtake the LDP. So it would increase their election coffers and also draw potentially more members to them. So there's a lot going on there. You're just seeing the beginning stages of that, but it's something to keep our eye on, and I'll do that as well. Moving on, there's a Japanese gentleman who works for a pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca Pharma, that we reported on in March. He was arrested and detained in China for espionage, and he's still detained. The Japanese Foreign Ministry is becoming a little bit more aggressive and insisting that this gentleman be released from custody. The Chinese government arrested him for potentially his illegal activities and for espionage just as he was getting ready to leave China to come back home for a rotation. They arrested him, and then 2 months later, China revised its espionage law and made it much more difficult and tight. And so this individual, unfortunately, falls into a wider web of what the Chinese consider to be espionage. He's been in detention and secluded away for a very long time. And the Chinese government now is saying that under their law, they're going to put him in criminal detention. And then 30 days after that, 37 days later after that, then they are allowed to arrest him. So apparently he's in detention, secluded from his family. I think an embassy official can visit him from time to time, but otherwise he is completely incommunicado, and the Japanese government wants him released. And if he is arrested under the Espionage Act, it looks like he will have a very long time before he is released from China. Since 2014, there have been 17 Japanese nationals arrested for espionage in China. 5 of them still remain in China. So it's one of those things that continues to irritate the Japan-China relationship. There are a lot of other things that are irritating the Japan-China relationship. One of those is the complete ban on food imports from Japan, all of Japan. And this is causing a huge pain in the industry here. 42% of the exports of Japan foodstuffs or fish stock was going to China. And so that is causing a huge issue. In Hokkaido in particular, they have warehouses full of scallops and hotate. I guess hotate is scallops that are in warehouses frozen. They can't sell them. If they sell them, they fall below market value, and everybody loses there. So they're waiting for some sort of a relief there. The other thing that's happening that's irritating the China-Japan relations is the Japanese embassy in Beijing received more than 400,000 calls. Some of them are prank calls. Some of them are just telephone calls yelling at them for releasing the Fukushima water over the last 5 weeks. So that is really outrageous. And it's a way of practicing diplomacy, I guess, Chinese style. So the situation is not improving very well. At the same time that the Chinese are criticizing the Japanese for releasing the treated water into the Pacific, they're also sending fleets into Japanese water to pilfer Japanese fish to bring back to China for sale there. Of course, I guess it would be illicitly, but as far as the Chinese are concerned, they don't recognize the territorial limitations. So that's causing a big issue, and it's also somewhat curious that the Chinese are banning all Japanese food stocks, but are sending fleets of their fisheries to come to Japanese waters to fish the waters here. The other thing that is curious is that if you go to China and you talk to people, they love to talk about how bad Japan is, and the dumping of the water, and it's contaminated water, and it's going to kill everybody in the world. And they don't really know that the same thing has been happening in China for years. The quality of the water that is being discharged into the South China Sea is far worse and not monitored as much as the Fukushima water. But there's just a complete blockage of that kind of information. So many of my friends and colleagues who do business in China are frequently cornered by their Japanese colleagues and talked to about why Japan is bad and what they should be doing. And they have no idea, and they really have a blind eye and are really not very tolerant of somebody explaining to them things that are taken for a practical matter, generally speaking, here in Japan. But once again, it is fake news. It is the manipulation of information, propaganda that we're all pretty much smeared in, including not just with regard to China, Japan, the United States, what's going on in Ukraine. You might have noticed, by the way, that Zelensky, in his speech, sat right next to Mr. Kishida before his speech. It got a lot of coverage, and he got a lot of I think social media coverage on that. So you can see where he's really burnished his image there. But you know, coming home is really where the bacon is. Right now, 10% of Japan's population consists of people who are 80 years old or older. That's incredible, 10%. So the amount of social services that are required to keep these people, they're essentially non-productive components of the workforce, is growing enormously. We've got this inverted pyramid with the number of people that are coming into the workforce to support that rising cost, and it's going to get bigger. Everybody knows the demographic challenge that Japan has. So it's 10% now. It's going to be 30% in 10 years. And that's why the prime minister is really pushing hard to generate some sort of initiative for people to have children, for people to get married, to buy a house. And those three components are very lacking here. And part of the reason why they're lacking is because of wage deflation. Even though Japanese workers received the greatest wage increase this year over the last 30 years, they're still under the water because of inflation. Inflation these days, it's 3.1% at the latest number. We believe that number to be a little bit squishy. We think it's a little bit higher than that. But as far as food services, fresh fruit, produce, hotel stays, that sort of thing, that's at around 4% inflation. And so people are reluctant to buy a house or get married or certainly have children if they are married. And the population decline here is really becoming a huge issue for the prime minister, which is another one of the reasons you'll hear him talk about it this week when he talks about his economic policy going forward, that there is a huge labor crunch here. Let me see. I think the number of people in the labor market, currently the number of people in the labor market right now, Japan has about 125 million people. I think the number of people in the workforce is around 67 million people. So the rest are retired people, children, stay-at-home moms, that sort of thing, or maybe people that are just have just checked out. So as of July, 67 million workers, and those numbers are going to fall. And there is a crunch that is approaching us probably before the end of this year, and that is typically in drivers and truck drivers, the supply chain, construction workers, that sort of thing. So this crunch, it's being revealed to us in a lot of different areas. We talk about the Osaka Expo, for example. So there's been news in the Osaka Expo. The construction licenses have only been issued to two foreign countries to build a pavilion there. And one of the reasons why the countries are reluctant to join in on the construction of the expo is because the construction costs are extremely high, and they're expected to get higher before the expo starts in 2025. And also the number of construction workers that are available and the laws that are applied to construction workers. So in the winter of 2024, just in a couple of months, the number of overtime work that they can run is going to be limited. So once again, in order to achieve the same level of production, if they're limited to the overtime work, then that means you need to fill it in with other workers. 87% of municipal offices have said we want more foreign workers. And I think when they say we want more foreign workers, it means Southeast Asia workers, people who can do the manual labor and work at the fields, and probably some office work. But I think the biggest need is for manual labor, for farming, for road construction, for just construction in general. So this crunch is really beginning to build. The prime minister distinctly feels it. So I think you will hear something, this major policy speech that we expect this week will be important. And obviously, he's going to come up with a supplemental budget that will make your eyes go open, because they've already said if we're going to jigger the economy, it needs to be something that really excites people and gets them moving and makes them want to have children. They see a design for the future. We don't know where the money's going to come from. The prime minister also came back with a new design on attracting foreign investment. He's going to set up new trade zones and make the language barrier easier. We're having English as an open source language, rather than having Japanese as the language of choice. There are a lot of things that he's kind of pulling out of the air. We don't know how it's going to go. I think part of that is to attract the financial industry, which is leaving Hong Kong in droves. They're going all to Singapore, and very few of them are coming to Tokyo. The governor of Tokyo, Koike, and the prime minister would distinctly love to have Japan as the center hub for the financial market. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. And there are a lot of other issues just with the basic economy that are confronting the prime minister that I don't know if really this initiative by the prime minister, he just announced it before he left New York actually, is going to gain much traction, but we're going to continue to watch it. The Bank of Japan, we're always watching them. The yen was at 148 this week, almost the same number that it was at last week. The economy is dependent almost exclusively on exports. It's not typically, a typical economy is going to be mostly based on internal consumption and the engine of growth within the company. That's not the case here in Japan. Most of the economy is dependent on exports, and with the Japan yen as high as it is, so that means it's the value is low. That means they have to sell more product to get the same amount of money. The largest contributor to the Japanese economy are autos and auto parts, and they've done very strongly this last quarter, particularly with the United States. But that is probably not a long-term good bet, with the yen probably staying at this level. The Bank of Japan wants to keep easy money policy going. There's not going to be much of a shakeup there because the economy is just too delicate right now. So it's a very interesting situation for Japan to be in light of everything that's going on in the region, the military exercises, what's going on with China, and China being very aggressive with Japan and not releasing the pharmaceutical worker, and just the phone calls, everything else that's going on there. At the same time, Korea is really starting to grow up with this relationship with Japan. So a lot of people didn't think it would go very well. The United States, to their credit, really pushed it. President Biden held the three-way summit about a month ago at Camp David, and it's really starting to produce a lot of good value. The South Koreans, noticing this change and this development, the relations between Japan and Korea right now are the best they have been in about 20 years. So there is a new initiative being pursued, championed by South Korea, to have a three-way summit between Japan, South Korea, and China. And that's interesting. They spoke on the sidelines at the UN. They're going to be meeting this next week, to talk about a potential meeting of heads of state. And I guess if I was the United States, I would look at that as a hopeful and nice development. But, China, Japan, and South Korea, they're all tied in. Their best trading partners are with each other. They're close geographically. It's a very tender region here. For them to get together as a three-way talk without the United States there, I guess has got to cause some maybe curiosity, but it looks like that's developing. At the same time, Kim Jong-un, our great leader from North Korea, traveled to Russia, went to Vladivostok, and then visited the spaceport. He's been in Russia for almost a week. He just returned yesterday on his armored train, a whirlwind tour. He had great access to Vladimir Putin and also to many influential members of the Politburo there. So things have been quiet there. There have been no missile launches. Everything's been very quiet with regard to North Korea on the missile part, basically because Kim Jong-un has been out of the country. So you can anticipate he's getting a little bit more wind in his sails. Apparently, his trip was geared towards supplementing the Russian arsenal with rockets and artillery, and in exchange for that from Russia, getting high-tech work on satellites, on missile technology, on trajectory, and that sort of thing. So Russia and North Korea being working that closely together is a worrisome development. And as always, we talk about these worrisome developments 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, we actually see the fruit of that development. So we're going to keep an eye on that and continue to report it. Let me see what else I've got for you. I think, Maya, that's about it. I've gone on plenty long. Why don't we wrap it up and go into Q&A? Thank you very much for hosting this weekly briefing, Maya. And thanks everybody in the audience for participating.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Yes. Well, once again, I'll repeat myself. Thank you very much for showing up every week and not running away midway. I know that the questions I have scare you tremendously, but well, you have become kind of accustomed to them, I believe.
Well, yeah, but I wish people would come up on stage and say, "Hi, I'm not Maya. I'd like to ask a question, and here's my views." But it is nice that they can pepper you with their comments, and then you can form them in, or maybe join a couple of them into a concise question, and then we can talk about that. But give me a hand here, guys.
Yes, everybody who is here, please do help Timothy and save him from the questions I have in stock. So you're welcome to join me here in Clubhouse so that we can talk. And of course, Timothy, he joins across the platforms. Thank you very much in advance for doing that. Well, Timothy, I wanted to know actually, so we expect to have a general election in September next year. That is more or less 1 year from now. And we already have a reshuffled cabinet. Well, my question is two-layered. First, the first one is, do we expect, or what are the chances of having another reshuffle before the general election?
That's okay. You want to get with the second layer?
And then the second layer is, so do we expect any, let's say, major policies to be voted in during this 1 year from now, before the general election?
Absolutely. So let's talk about a potential reshuffling of the cabinet. It's always within the parameters of the prime minister to shuffle his cabinet whenever he feels a need for it. So he lost 4 ministers the first time. He replaced them piecemeal, one by one, and then he did his cabinet shuffle just this last week. So it is a bit of a gamble to shuffle the cabinet. I think it would be somewhat telling if he did shuffle the cabinet with the remaining year left in his presidency. I think he would more likely shuffle new members in rather than do a whole reshuffle. I think if he's going to do anything the next time, it's going to be a snap election. I don't see that happening before the end of the year, but probably before he ends up being president of the LDP and thereby being elected as prime minister for a second term. With regard to policies that are anticipated, absolutely. So the calendar year the fiscal year for Japan, as you know, starts on April 1st. So there is a diet session that is constitutionally mandated. It starts in January. It goes 150 days. It ends around June, sometimes in July. And in this 150-day period, the Japanese government is, number one, supposed to pass a budget, but also they pass laws and regulations that they have been considering. They're considering right now that they have considered all this year. So some of the budget has already been earmarked for those projects and policies and the legislation that has been passed 4 months ago on April 1st.
Right.
And then they've gone through all the machinations to do it and to implement it and create new designs and change laws that haven't been managed well because of the wording in the regulations, or actually the wordings of the legislation. And the number one thing they do on April is they pass the budget, and then there are laws that come up because they have the budget to do it. Then they say we can pass these laws. You might remember Mr. Hagiura, who is one of the key members of the Abe faction, is in charge of that kind of legislative process within the LDP. And not this time, but probably more like in January of last year, he said the LDP wants to pass 64 bills in the next diet session. So we're gearing up to that. So that's within his parameters, the legislation that's going to be considered. So we don't know, but last year there were 64 pieces of legislation that were considered, including child welfare and the Children's Agency, the economic security legislation, things like that. So yes, definitely there's going to be lots of policy and legislation that it will be concerned. You'll hear about it more and more after January. So at the current point right now, a month ago, the various ministries were supposed to, I guess they all did, submit their budget request to the prime minister. So between then and January, he looks at it, he tries to weigh it, he figures it out, and then moving into January in the diet session, then they get down to brass tacks. Who's going to get what money? How much money are we going to put in the budget? What policies are we going to pursue? And as a consequence of that, then Mr. Hagiura comes up with, in order to achieve what the prime minister just told me and how much money we have and how it's going to be earmarked, I project that we're going to be able to address, of all of the issues that are confronting us, let's limit it down to these bills that we will try and promote and finish within the 150-day session. So that's how it works. And so guaranteed there will be some enormous policy plays that are proposed and suggested and debated. You'll hear more about that from January into June or July.
Well, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, so obviously we'll have to be on the watch out from that time on. And just to, let's say, to move to something a topic that is actually very hot at the moment, and most of the people, not only in Japan, but out of Japan, are talking about. So do you anticipate any policies that can actually, let's say, facilitate the number of women in Japanese politics? Because this has been a very hot topic recently. And, well, of course, there was a lot of coverage, how the state ministers and vice ministers, that were elected now. So they're mostly... Like zero, yes, there's like zero there. So, and we know that obviously the LDP and also the Democratic Party for the People, they are aware of the problem. They're aware of the criticism, internal and external criticism of their previous and current policies with regards to women in politics and business and so on. But do you anticipate anything more than what we have at the moment?
So when you started the question, did you say, what is, do you anticipate any policy? What was the question?
Yes. Do you anticipate any policy that will facilitate, the increase of number of women in politics and business?
So before policy can emerge, there has to be a drive, not just a recognition, but a drive to do something about it. And because of that drive and enough force behind it, then somebody comes up and says, we should do it this way rather than that way. And here's my recommendation for doing that. And that kind of filters up, it gets enough people to support and stand behind it. And then gradually it filters into a ministry which has basically the authority over that particular issue. The bureaucrats get it. And if you have some members of the parliament who are standing behind it, it could be a member of the LDP, it could be a member of the opposition party, who actually supports and aids in the drafting of that policy, then yes, it can come up. It's a long process. The real issue here is not the policy, but the drive and the intentions that policy basically represents. So it's earlier in the process. And that's why I think this case with Miss Obuchi, Yuko Obuchi, is so important, because many people, she is held like Miss Takaichi, and other people like the current foreign minister, Kamikawa Yoko. They show people that you can achieve a level of leadership, and you can survive in this very male-dominated political world. It just takes a little bit of oomph, and it takes a personality. Many people would say it takes a family relation, because there's a high percentage of second and third generation politicians in the current cabinet. That's not unique to Japan. That happens everywhere. But I think with regard to women, Miss Obuchi is, her father was prime minister. So yes, you've got a little bit of an advantage there. But doing that for the general person to help them aspire to that kind of a role, I think it starts much earlier. It starts in elementary school. It starts in high school. It starts in sports. It starts in, granted, the number of girls going to law school is almost at parity. So that's a good sign. The number of people who are becoming lawyers, has increased. The number of people who are working at the bucho and somewhat semi-level within Japanese corporations is increasing. Japanese corporations still suffer from a very, very low level of participation at the board level. The prime minister has said, we need to change that. And if you're on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, you need to have 30% women on your board by 2030. And that's right around the corner. So opportunities are growing, but having actually the desire and the fortitude to do that, it's just tough. For the women, I think this case with Miss Obuchi is a good example of it. For a man who has gotten involved in all sorts of trouble, and then they resign, or they put a mask on their face, and they're quiet for a while, they can emerge. They can emerge in 3 years or 4 years. It's happening right now. Mr. Amadi, he lost his position as Secretary General. He had to resign. He's a great guy. He's got lots of wherewithal. He's a great politician. He did get nailed. You'll see him come up again, and it's not going to be 14 years. So I think there's a premium on just highlighting women. I think it's an easy target, and also I think they suffer criticism more personally than maybe the men do. I don't know if that's a blanket statement, or actually it's just my impression. So I think it's harder for them, and also it's easier to jump on them and point fingers at them. So we can just be hopeful.
Yes, because one of the things I believe is that there aren't enough women per se in the beginning, as you said, the starting level. So I hear a lot of criticism now that there are very few women in the cabinet, or among the state ministers and vice deputy state ministers and so on. But at the same time, there aren't enough women to choose from.
Yeah.
The pool is very small. So the question, I believe, is how can you increase women's participation in the very first place, so that pool grows, and there is actually, it's easier to choose. Not only.
Can we talk about that? Because that's a great question. So look at the routes, the routes people take to becoming a member of parliament. Okay, The number one guaranteed route is that your father, your grandfather, somebody in your family was a member of parliament. So you join them, you become a secretary, or you work on their election campaign, and gradually you get ingratiated into it. You become involved in it, and then maybe you run for office. The second way is you are a bureaucrat and you've been somewhat successful, or maybe you haven't been successful, but you aspire to a greater position. You don't want to work for the bureaucracy anymore. You want to have a little bit more power and authority. You want to have your own salary. You want to have a driver. And so you run there. So a lot of the politicians come from bureaucracy. The third kind of good way to come in is that you worked in politics because you were a diet secretary or something like that. And that's the vast majority of politicians. They came in through that route. It's not just because they were a successful doctor or successful lawyer and they wanted to get into politics because they've achieved their success. They have a company that's going to provide them a little bit of money, whether they win or lose. And even if they lose, they still have some place to go back to. That's similar with lawyers. So the number of women being at parity with men in the law schools now and entering into the legal field is very good too, because in Japan, if you run for the office of election, it basically requires you to resign from what you're doing. You can't do two things at once. So if you're working as a bureaucrat or if you're working in a company, unless it's your dad's company or unless it's a law firm, if you lose your election, you are out of luck. You're going to sell cars or insurance or teach at a university. So the risk of failing in that venture is very high. There are very few places for one to go after they've failed an election. And if you've failed an election once, most of the time you're going to fail the second time unless something else happens. And in order to do that, you need to have a political party that says, I like you. I'm going to support you. You don't have to come up with all the money yourself. We're going to give you campaign leaflets. We're going to give you staff to help you. We're going to have a campaign truck that you don't have to pay for, that sort of thing. So I think with the number of women, also the attractiveness of people going into the bureaucracy has fallen, right? We know that data, that it used to be maybe 15, 20 years ago, that the highest target for recent university graduates was to get into a ministry, any ministry, because you've got guaranteed lifelong employment. You have a nice pension at the end. Mom and dad can brag about you, and it's not going to be a bad life for you. So fewer and fewer people are doing that. They're going to IT. They're going to these startups. But still, I think the number of women who have passed the qualifying exam to become civil servants is increasing, and the government is pushing on that. They've been pushing on that ever since Prime Minister Abe. So those numbers are increasing. So that route is likely to increase. The number of people coming in from the law firm, so even if they lose an election, they can still go back to practicing law. It's not going to be the death bell for them. The thing you can't really highly calibrate are the women whose fathers are current members of parliament. So without a little bit more grooming or attractiveness of that, most people would say, why would I put myself through that? There are easier ways for me to live. There are happier ways. I want to have some kids. And if I'm going to run in a campaign, that's going to push that off. And I've got to deal with my husband. So there are a lot of things going on there. But it's a great question.
Well, thank you for the acknowledgement. Okay, so we'll go through a couple of other questions. The first one is in Clubhouse and the second one is on LinkedIn. Actually, we have Mehran coming up. He's up on stage. Good morning. Can you hear me, Mehran?
Yes. Hi, Maya. Hi, Timothy. What I was amazed is I raised my hand to come and talk about Japanese women in politics, and then Maya brought it up. Oh, that's amazing. Okay. We must be alike. But the reason I wanted to raise that was all of the people in this room, including myself, we love Japan, but Japanese women are not participating in politics. And recently, Indian Parliament did something. They actually passed a law reserving 1/3 of the lower house and the local assemblies for women. I think Japan needs to do something like that. You have to force the issue. You pass a law, reserve 1/3 of the seats for women, And then in the beginning, it would be a little rough, but gradually you have plenty of qualified women. And this will take root because this is something Japan lacks. And it's a shame. We all love Japan, but that's something needs to be done. That's what I was going to raise. And Maya brought it up before me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for participating.
Thank you. Well, I always think that in Japan, if there are no laws or regulation, nothing happens here. No new things happen, actually. And I believe that quite a few people understand this, and the politicians do too. The question, though, is about internal politics within the political parties. I believe it is also, public approval and so on. So hopefully at some point we'll have a legislation that regulates, the number of women so that they can start from somewhere and actually build that pool of talent among, the politicians and so on. But, well, I think this is something that we'll probably have to wait and see, or whether it happens. Yeah.
Mike, can I just reflect on this a bit? And it's a great question. So when they built the diet, we walked through the diet just this last week. And if you notice, the diet was completed in 1936. It took 20 years for them to build it. And when they built it for the physique of the Japanese people in the 1920s and the 1930s. So when you go there and you sit down, everything seems a little bit cramped. And it's because they weren't built for our physique. But Maya, you'll remember we had lunch and then people wanted to go to the bathroom. And when they built that, they had the women's bathroom and then the men's bathroom. And the men's bathroom was replete with lots of facilities. And you go to the women's part and it's not as, there aren't that many spaces. So it's structural. And I think, yes, we can come up with a law that says, at least 30%. I think that's actually a good idea. That has to come, like Maya said, from the LDP. The LDP is the bear in the room, and they're the ones that decide this sort of thing. And I don't think that they would be very accommodating to that kind of 30%. How am I going to get 30% candidates that I know are going to be LDP? What are we going to do, right? They're probably a lot of women who want to be politicians, but can we rely on them? Will they vote according to the dictates of party policy? It's just a huge can of worms, but it really goes down to the structural issue. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult here, because of all the things we talked about. It would be great to have more women involved. The UN Commission already said that it'd take 100 years for Japan to reach parity in the political world. In the economic world, in the corporate world, it'll take less than 100 years. Actually, I think they said 130 years, but probably 80 years.
I think they were a little bit more optimistic, talking about 80 years or something like that. But yes, Gabor, thank you for that. So Gabor supplied a number that only 12% of the LDP diet members are women. So yes, unfortunately, that's true. And
I think. Sorry, just to jump in. I think among the political parties, that is one of the lowest. I think you've got more in the Komeito and in the Constitutional Democratic Party, because the opposition parties see this as a strength. They see this as one of the weaknesses of the LDP and the LDP policy. So they're always looking for female candidates, and they've been relatively successful. The individual, Ms. Kata, that was appointed by the Prime Minister to be his special advisor from the Democratic People's Party, was a leader of that party, in fact. So,
right, yes. Well, definitely we need, and we will have to wait for a generational change once again, like with so many other things here. Okay, and then I'm moving to LinkedIn. Now here we have Hiroko, and she wrote, I would like to hear your comments or thoughts about PM Kishida's address at the United Nations, especially on the point of Japan chair for a world without nuclear weapons, with a new 3 billion yen contribution.
Yeah. So this is that good? Can I go on?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So yes, the Prime Minister spoke on that, and he actually one of the first things he did when he got to New York was chair a committee of other countries on the reduction and elimination of fusionable material to create the explosive components for nuclear bombs. So, and not only just nuclear bombs, but also for power stations as well. So he started this. He went very hard on it in G7, and it was going to be a nuclear-free world. And that was one of his great contributions to G7. He took everybody to Hiroshima, took them to the War Museum. Every leader was required to go into the War Museum or to the Hiroshima War Museum, and they actually timed everybody how much time they were there, and they reported that in the press. Unfortunately, Joe Biden just kind of walked through. He was the shortest one to spend time there, but it was one of the requirements. It's just like walking up to the Peace Monument, the Eternal Flame there, and paying your respects. This is one of the requirements. So he was really gung-ho on that. He wants to be, as his signature move, that individual who, he's from Hiroshima, right? So his election district is from Hiroshima, to be known worldwide and throughout, through his legacy, to be the person that really worked hard to bring nuclear armament in check and to prevent, nuclear disaster, and to eliminate the number of nuclear weapons that are proliferated. So Japan stands fast that there are no nuclear weapons on Japanese soil. It will not host them. It will not produce them. So there are some things, like in a lot of things in Japanese politics, that you scratch your head and you wonder, in fact, logically, is that true? Can that actually be true? But you've got a lot going on in Okinawa as well. And in this kind of regional dynamic that we've got going on, a lot of the people do have nuclear devices. We're not quite sure what the status is with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. We suspect he does have nuclear weapons. He was able to get some sort of fusionable material through the administration of Bill Clinton, you might remember, with the power generation that he authorized the North Koreans to have. So that relationship has been up and down depending on what's on the table. But you've got North Korea, China. South Korea wants it to be a nuclear-free zone too. So there's a lot of comfort in South Korea and Japan talking. You've got the Russians, who have probably the largest arsenal of nuclear devices in the world, and they're at the north of Japan. So it's a very delicate time. People say, Japan, your best bet, if you're not going to generate and produce nuclear weapons, is go on the other side of the spectrum and be peaceful. Just say, we're going to be neutral. We're going to be like Sweden. We're not going to host that. We're not going to have a military force that threatens the region. We're not going to have offensive weapons. And so that debate still continues. That is the reason why Article 9 and actually the entire Constitution has been untouched. Of the things that need to be touched in the Japanese Constitution, Article 9 is one of several, but it's been untouched. In the current world, there is no constitution that has survived 70 years and been unedited, untouched for that period of time. So it is about time. And that debate, are we going to stay on this side of the spectrum? Are we going to go towards the other side of the spectrum? Is still an open issue. We continue to watch it. So thanks for the question, though.
Yes, thank you very much for it. And then there is a comment, I believe, about the parity between men and women. And it's a comment by Nathan Raymond. So he says that digital transformation is important so that remote workers can visit and contribute to the Japanese economy through a peer-to-peer network. And if it is prioritized, we can actually work on brokering relationships and save the economy for men and women. So yes, and right.
So
okay.
I think what Nathan is saying is we need to allow more women to contribute to the economy by making peer-to-peer easier, and maybe by extension, not having to go into the office. So you can do work from home, you can work from a remote office, and maybe that will free up some of the workers as well. I think that's a great observation. Japan is in so much trouble now with workers. They can't import enough. They don't want to have enough workers, foreign workers, supplement the Japanese workers. They just don't want that. They'd rather go AI or bring women into the workforce if they can. So I think it's not a dead issue, even though progress seems to be slow. I think, like Nathan suggested, they're going to use AI and collaborative technology to open it up for more women. But in any event, autonomous vehicles are definitely on the way. There's going to be such a crunch here towards the end of the year and into next year that it's a foregone conclusion that all of the trucks that are coming into major cities and then going out to go pick up foodstuffs and products again, with the number of people who are available to do that kind of work and their age and their matriculation out of the working system, it's got to be accommodated somehow.
Yes, and that's really a nice segue to the next comment and question by Richard Woughton. Richard wrote, I came across an interesting observation recently. Many Japanese people only feel like they can be politically active, protest, etc. after they have retired.
Yeah.
The feeling is that if they protest, it will look like they are representing their company, or they fear their company might retaliate. Since so many Japanese relate so closely with their companies, does that hurt political activism and participation in Japan? Your thoughts on this, Timothy?
That's a great observation, Richard. And also, if you look at the participation of LinkedIn too, it's the same sort of argument. I don't want to have a LinkedIn profile because my employer might think I'm looking for a job. LinkedIn, although it was created as a job site, has grown so far beyond being a job site for recruiters. It still uses that, but it is a social media platform. Even in that light, though, people are afraid, Japanese people are afraid to project that potentially they're looking for a job. That's why their resume is online. That's why they're providing comment. And yeah, it does put a huge wet blanket on social discourse, at least on that platform, and also in contributing to the political economy and the political activism. The other thing too, Richard, you've been here for a long time. You're a seasoned Japan hand, and you remember the tremendous fights that were centered around Tokyo University for the revision of the status of forces between the United States and Japan, and also what went on with Narita Airport. Very violent, a lot of energy going there, and you haven't seen much of that recently. A lot of those people, the students and the activists in Narita, they came back from these activities. The police were involved. It was very violent. A lot of people were hurt, and came back into society and to their companies and the universities, and things kind of has settled down for the last 30 or 40 years. But I think people have calibrated the amount of energy that's required to protest on a kind of a physical level, and the kind of retributions that you might suffer from people who live in your neighborhood, or worse, colleagues in your company. So those kinds of relationships and that kind of social status, the Japanese really protect very highly. So rather than having an opportunity to express an opinion, they usually just keep their mouth closed, because to get involved in that kind of a discourse, it's like, Trump versus Bush. I mean, we have the same thing going on in the United States. Even the people who support Trump are afraid to kind of be more vocal about it, because the people who support Bush are really aggressive about, well, how can you do that? He is such a monster. And similarly, people to support Bush, well, they're typically more actively engaged in that kind of dialogue, but it's such a tension. And I think the similar thing is seen here in Japan, that you've got to hold the company line. You've got to be a company man. You've got to be reliable. You got to show up on time. You got to wear the suit. You got to bring the bag. You got to sit up straight. And although there are lots of different features, I mean, it's a huge economy here, but I think as a standard, that's a true standard. And so, yeah, I think people, when they finally retire, they say, now I have some freedom. I can go out and play a little bit more golf. I can exercise my freedom a little bit more. It's there's a lot of them in their 60s and 70s who have retired. But political activism is more about feet on the ground and joining in foot protests. So if you're in Tokyo proper and traveling anywhere around Kasumigaseki or the Diet Building, you do run into from time to time large groups that have placards, who have police escort, that are protesting something. But I think what people have come to appreciate is that only has a certain amount of impact. Unless you've got like what we had during Mr. Abe's first couple of years, the huge protests in front of the Diet, thousands of young kids, people really, shouting out so that even in Diet proceedings, you could hear them shouting. Something of that nature actually begins to have an impact. But under the normal circumstances, it's really hard for the normal Japanese citizen to participate in an effective, meaningful way. So I think there are other ways to do that. But once again, that's Japan for you. And that's also one of the reasons why you've got something like this, the Bunshun. It fills a need that is unaddressed otherwise in polite society. So, yeah, it's a curious way to kind of guide and participate in Japanese politics. The easiest way is during the election time. So the election for members of any election, actually, it has a festival atmosphere. And at that time, you can really express yourself in a kind of a ambivalent environment. But otherwise, to take a hard stand on, let's save the trees in Guyane, for example. Some people can, support you for that. Some people can be opposed to that. For the trees in Guyane, I think it's more of a softer one. But for example, the secrecy law or the number of children in the under protective control by the government, those kinds of issues, there are going to be two sides of that, and sometimes the debates get pretty heated. So nobody wants to step into that.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so thank you very much for the answers, Timothy, and sharing your thoughts on the questions we got. With this, it looks like we have gone through all the questions and comments. So thank you very much for answering them, for sticking with us, and to everybody in Clubhouse, YouTube, and LinkedIn, also Facebook. Thanks a lot for your time. And once again, as Timothy says, if you find these briefings interesting, please share them with your colleagues and friends, your family even, so that they can actually learn about not only about the latest happenings in Japanese politics, but learn how politics and other parts of the Japanese society work here in Japan. So thank you very much indeed. Yes, Timothy?
So one more thing, just in tying this up, we talked about the Benkyokai and your opportunity to actually kind of participate, even though you might be a foreigner, you don't have a vote, to see how this is done and if you wanted to be involved in that. So in your industry or in your professional life, there might be a certain ministry that has sway over your industry. And if there's a politician that is having a Benkyokai, sometimes it's difficult for you to find out who that person is, or even the schedule of when they're speaking, and if there is an opportunity for you to join that. So in any of these Benkyokais, you need to have an invitation. You can't just show up. But if you're interested in that sort of thing, either ping me or Maya, and let's see if we can plug you in. And once again, it's an open invitation. You need an invitation, though, for Kiyoshi Odawada's briefing in, 2 or 3 weeks at his regularly scheduled Benkyokai. But the more people that are involved or engaged, you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. These briefings they're great briefings. That you have hot information that most people aren't going to get. You get them before the press actually gets them. And it's a good way to participate. So it's not for everybody, but if you're interested in that, please let us know. Thanks, Maya.
Yeah. Thank you. And if you haven't connected with Timothy Langley yet on LinkedIn, please remember to do that. Or also follow him on other platforms like YouTube, yes, and Twitter, which is now X. Forgive me for using the old name of the platform, and Facebook as well. Well, that's all for the moment. Timothy, once again, it's time for you to, well, enjoy your Sunday. And we'll be here once again next week at 8:20 next week, Sunday. Before that, on Wednesday, 8 o'clock in Clubhouse. We'll be there with Tim Sullivan and me, and also James Howell. So thanks a lot, Timothy. Prepare your best smile because I'm ending the live stream now.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining in.